Did you already transfer everything to her, Mom? Or are we still waiting on the paperwork? I looked up slowly from the hospital chair, my fingers still wrapped around my husband's hand, already cold. What paperwork? I asked. The silence that followed was not grief. It was calculation. My daughter-in-law didn't answer right away. She just glanced at my son, brief, sharp, almost irritated, like he had spoken too soon. That was the moment I realized something was being hidden from me. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels. The room still smelled like antiseptic and something faintly metallic. Machines had gone quiet just minutes ago. The steady beeping that had filled the last 3 days of my life had stopped, replaced by a silence so heavy it pressed against my chest. My husband, Robert, had just passed away. 42 years of marriage, reduced to a still body beneath a thin white sheet. I didn't cry. Not yet. I sat there, holding his hand, tracing the veins I knew better than my own reflection. His wedding ring was still warm. Everything about him felt like it should continue. But it didn't. Behind me, I could hear whispers. Low, urgent, controlled. Not the soft mourning of family, but the quiet exchange of people already moving on to the next step. I didn't turn around. Not immediately. Instead, I leaned closer to Robert, as if I could still hear him. As if he might say something, anything, to explain why my son's voice had sounded like that. So, did you already handle the accounts? My daughter-in-law whispered. I thought you said she knew, my son replied under his breath. I said I assumed she knew, she snapped quietly. There's a difference. My fingers tightened slightly around Robert's hand. Accounts? What accounts? I had handled our finances for decades. Every bill, every mortgage payment, every tax return. I knew where everything was. Or at least, I thought I did. I finally turned my head. They stopped talking instantly. My son, Daniel, straightened his posture, his expression shifting so quickly it would have been impressive if it hadn't been so familiar. Concern. Soft eyes. Slight frown. A performance. Mom, he said gently, stepping closer. How are you holding up? Holding up. I looked at him for a long moment. At 38, he still had the same eyes he had as a child. But something behind them had changed over the years. Something harder. More distant. I'm here, I said quietly. It wasn't an answer. He nodded anyway, as if it was enough. Behind him, my daughter-in-law, Melissa, stood perfectly still. Her black dress was tailored, elegant. Not a wrinkle. Not a tear. Her makeup was flawless, subtle, but precise. Prepared. That was the word that came to mind. Prepared for this moment. I'll go speak with the doctor, she said, her voice smooth, controlled. There are probably some forms we need to sign. Forms. There it was again. I watched her walk out of the room, her heels clicking softly against the hospital floor. Daniel followed her a few seconds later, pausing only briefly to squeeze my shoulder. We'll take care of everything, Mom, he said. Take care of everything. The door closed behind them, and for the first time since Robert had taken his last breath, I felt something other than grief. I felt excluded. 2 days later, the house felt wrong. Not empty. Wrong. Every object was exactly where it had always been. The same leather chair by the window. The same framed photos lining the hallway. The same clock ticking steadily above the fireplace. But the rhythm of the house had changed. Robert had been the quiet presence that held everything together. Without him, the silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was hollow. I moved through the kitchen slowly, my slippers soft against the tile. The coffee machine hummed, filling the space with a familiar smell. Routine. I poured myself a cup, my hand steady. Too steady. I hadn't cried at the hospital. I hadn't cried at home. The tears were there, somewhere, but they refused to come. Instead, everything felt distant. Like I was watching my own life from across the room. The back door opened. Daniel and Melissa stepped inside without knocking. They had keys. Of course they did. Mom, Daniel called out, his voice louder than necessary. We stopped by to check on you. I nodded, setting my cup down. Melissa walked straight past me, placing her designer bag on the counter as if it belonged there. We brought groceries, she said, though I hadn't asked for any. 2 bags. Neatly packed. Efficient. Control, disguised as care. That's kind, I said. She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. They stayed for lunch. Melissa insisted on cooking, moving around my kitchen with a confidence that felt intrusive. She opened cabinets without asking, rearranged things slightly, took note of where everything was, mapping the space. I sat at the table, watching. Daniel checked his phone repeatedly, his thumb scrolling with practiced ease. Neither of them mentioned Robert. Not once. Instead, the conversation drifted toward practical things. Insurance, property taxes, long-term planning. Mom, Daniel said casually, not looking up from his phone. Have you thought about what you're going to do with the house? The question landed softly, but it echoed. I live here, I replied. For now, Melissa added quickly, placing a plate in front of me. For now? I picked up my fork. Didn't eat. I mean, Daniel continued, finally looking at me. It's a lot of space for one person. Maintenance, utilities, it adds up. Adds up. I almost smiled. I had been managing this house for over 30 years. Every repair, every bill, every unexpected expense. Alone. Even when Robert was alive, I handled it all. I'll manage, I said simply. Melissa sat down across from me, folding her hands neatly. Of course you will, she said. We just want what's best for you. What's best for you? Her tone was soft. Too soft. I nodded again, keeping my face neutral. Inside, something was shifting. Not breaking. Shifting. That evening, after they left, I walked into Robert's study. The door creaked slightly as I pushed it open. Everything was untouched. His desk, his chair, the stack of papers he had been reviewing just days ago. I stepped inside slowly, closing the door behind me. The air felt different here. Still, private. I moved to the desk, running my fingers along the surface. There were faint indentations from years of use. Small scratches I had never noticed before. Details. I opened the top drawer. Pens. Notebooks. Nothing unusual. The second drawer. Files. Organized. Carefully labeled. Robert had always been meticulous, but this felt different. Intentional. I pulled out a folder. No label. Inside, there were documents. Bank statements. Investment summaries. Numbers. Large numbers. Larger than anything I had seen before. My breath slowed. $35 million. I stared at the page, my vision narrowing. 35 million. Not in our joint account. Not in anything I had ever accessed. A separate structure. Trusts. Holdings. Layers of protection. Hidden. From everyone. Including me. Or so he thought. I sat down slowly in his chair. My hands didn't shake. They rested calmly on the desk, the paper lying flat between them. Suddenly, everything made sense. The whispers in the hospital. The paperwork. The way Melissa had said forms. They thought I didn't know. They thought this money, this entire structure, was something they would uncover, manage, control. After him. After I was gone. Or perhaps, instead of me. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. Robert, what did you do? Or more importantly, what did you expect me to do? The next morning, I made a decision. I said nothing. Not to Daniel. Not to Melissa. Not to anyone. I folded the documents carefully and placed them back exactly where I had found them. Then I closed the drawer, locked it, and walked out of the room. If they believed I was unaware, then I would let them believe it. Because sometimes, the most powerful position isn't the one where you speak. It's the one where you listen, and wait, and watch. I returned to the kitchen, poured myself another cup of coffee, and sat down at the table. The house was quiet again. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't hollow anymore. It was patient. And for the first time since my husband took his last breath, I understood something clearly. They thought I had nothing. They were wrong. And they had no idea what I was about to do next. The morning after I found the documents, I woke up at 5:12 a.m. Not because I had to, but because my body no longer knew how to rest. For 42 years, my mornings had begun the same way. Robert would wake up first, always before the alarm, moving quietly so he wouldn't disturb me. He'd make coffee, read the paper, sometimes stand by the window just watching the sun come up. I used to tease him about it. You act like the day is going to run away if you don't catch it early, I'd say. Now the house was still. No footsteps. No coffee brewing. No quiet presence filling the space between sounds. Just silence. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything from the day before. The hospital, the whispers, the word paperwork, and then the number, 35 million. It didn't feel real. Not in the way people imagine wealth. No excitement, no sense of possibility. Just weight. Heavy, quiet, dangerous weight. Because that kind of money doesn't just exist. It attracts attention, expectation, greed. I got up slowly and made my way to the kitchen. The floor felt colder than usual under my feet. Or maybe I just noticed it more now. I poured a cup of coffee and sat at the table. Same seat, same view, different life. Across from me, Robert's chair was empty. His newspaper was still folded neatly beside it, exactly where he had left it 3 days ago. I hadn't moved it. I wasn't ready to. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the warmth settle into my fingers. Then I said something out loud. I know. The words sounded strange in the quiet kitchen, but they grounded me. I knew. About the money. About the structure. About the fact that my own family didn't think I did. And that changed everything. For the past 2 years, things had been tighter than usual. Not desperate, but controlled. After Robert got sick, Daniel started stepping in more. At first, it felt like concern. He offered to help with certain accounts, to simplify things while I focused on Robert's care. I didn't question it. He was my son, and I was tired. Hospital visits, medication schedules, insurance calls, long nights sitting beside Robert while he slept, or tried to. When someone offers to carry part of that weight, you don't push them away. You say thank you. You trust. Looking back now, I can see the shifts. Small ones. Almost invisible at the time. Statements that stopped coming directly to the house. Accounts that were temporarily moved under joint access. Passwords that Daniel insisted on updating for security. At the time, it all sounded reasonable. Responsible, even. I remember one afternoon in particular. I was sitting in this very kitchen, sorting through medical bills, when Daniel came in holding a folder. Mom, you don't need to stress about all this, he said, setting it down in front of me. Let me take over the financial side for a while. I hesitated. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I had always handled these things myself. It was part of how I took care of the family. But then Robert called my name from the living room. His voice was weaker than usual. I looked back at Daniel. He smiled. Go, he said. I've got this. And I went. I left the folder on the table. I left the numbers in his hands. At the time, I told myself it was temporary. That once Robert recovered, or once things stabilized, I would step back in. But Robert didn't recover. And things didn't stabilize. They ended. And somewhere in that process, control shifted. Quietly. Completely. I took a sip of my coffee. It had gone lukewarm. I didn't notice when that happened. Across the room, my phone buzzed. A message. From Melissa. Good morning. Daniel and I are meeting with someone about the estate today. We'll keep you updated. The estate. Not our estate. Not your father's wishes. Just the estate. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed a reply. Thank you. That was it. 2 words. Polite. Neutral. Empty. I set the phone down and looked around the kitchen again. This house. Every wall. Every piece of furniture. Every memory. I had built this life alongside Robert, step by step. We didn't inherit it. We didn't fall into it. We worked. We sacrificed. We planned. And now, I was being gently positioned as someone who needed to be taken care of. Managed. Reduced. I stood up and walked to the window. The backyard looked the same. The garden Robert had planted years ago was still blooming. The roses were in full color, bright against the green. From the outside, nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. Because now I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. This wasn't just about grief. It wasn't just about loss. It was about perception. They saw me as vulnerable, distracted, out of the loop. And maybe, until yesterday, I was. But not anymore. Later that afternoon, I opened Robert's study again. The same quiet. The same stillness. I walked to the desk and placed my hand on the drawer. The one with the documents. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I stood there, thinking. About Robert. About why he had structured things the way he did. About why he hadn't told me everything. Or maybe, why he had waited until the very end. Because Robert wasn't careless. He didn't do things halfway. If he had hidden $35 million, there was a reason. And if he had left it where I could find it, there was a message. I opened the drawer slowly. The folder was exactly where I had left it. Inside, the numbers hadn't changed. But my understanding of them had. This wasn't just money. It was leverage. It was protection. It was a test. Not of the system. Of the people around me. I closed the folder again. Carefully. Deliberately. Then I locked the drawer. This time, I kept the key. That evening, Daniel called. Mom, How are you doing? He asked, his voice softer than usual. I'm all right, I said. A pause. Then, we met with an advisor today. There are a few things we need to organize. Some accounts, some legal details. Nothing you need to worry about right now. Nothing you need to worry about. I almost smiled. I trust you, I said. Another pause. Longer this time. Of course you do, he replied. After the call ended, I sat in the living room, the phone still in my hand. Trust. Such a simple word. So easy to say. So dangerous to give. I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. For the first time since Robert passed, my thoughts were clear. Not clouded by grief. Not softened by habit. Sharp. Focused. Quiet. They believed I was unaware. Dependent. Easily guided. And for now, I would let them believe that. Because the truth is, when people think you don't know what's happening, they stop hiding. And when they stop hiding, that's when you see everything. And I was ready to see. All of it. The day of the funeral arrived with a kind of quiet precision. Everything was arranged. Perfectly. The flowers. The seating. The printed programs placed neatly on each chair. Even the lighting inside the chapel felt controlled, soft enough to feel respectful, bright enough for people to observe one another. That's what funerals are, I realized as I stood near the entrance. Not just about grief, but about observation. People watching each other, measuring reactions, deciding what comes next. I wore black. Simple. No jewelry except my wedding ring. My hair pulled back the way Robert liked it. Neat, understated. I looked like a widow. Exactly what they expected. Guests began to arrive in small clusters. Neighbors. Old colleagues. A few distant relatives I hadn't seen in years. They approached me one by one. I'm so sorry for your loss. He was a wonderful man. If there's anything you need, I nodded. Thanked them. Held their hands for just the right amount of time. It was a rhythm I followed without thinking. But my attention wasn't on them. It was on Daniel and Melissa. They stood a few feet away, greeting people together. Always together. Melissa spoke more than Daniel. She guided conversations, filled silences, directed people where to go. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, subtle but constant. Control again. Daniel nodded, smiled, shook hands. But he watched her before he spoke, as if waiting for cues. At one point, I moved closer. Not directly, just enough to hear. We'll be handling the estate matters over the next few weeks, Melissa was saying to a man I didn't recognize. There are quite a few assets to organize. Assets. Not memories. Not a life. Assets. The man nodded politely. Of course. That can be complicated. Melissa smiled. We're prepared. Prepared. There was that word again. I stepped closer. Prepared for what? I asked quietly. They both turned. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across Melissa's face. Surprise. Then it was gone. Replaced by warmth. Just making sure everything goes smoothly, she said. So you don't have to worry about anything. I held her gaze. Then I nodded. Of course, I said. The service began. I sat in the front row. Alone. Daniel and Melissa sat one row behind me. Not beside me. Behind me. I noticed that. Not with emotion. Just observation. The pastor spoke about Robert's life. His work. His kindness. His quiet strength. Words that were all true, but incomplete. Because no one talked about the small things. The way he folded his shirts exactly the same way every time. The way he checked the doors twice before bed. The way he always left the last piece of dessert for me, even if I hadn't asked. Those were the things that made a life. Not the achievements people listed in speeches. Halfway through the service, I heard it again. A whisper. Low. Careful. They said there might be additional accounts, Melissa murmured. We'll find them, Daniel replied. They have to be somewhere. Additional accounts. I didn't turn around. I didn't react. I simply sat there, my hands folded in my lap, my expression calm. But inside, everything aligned. They were looking, actively, searching for something they believed existed, but couldn't locate. Which meant one thing. They didn't know. Not yet. After the service, we moved to the reception hall. Tables were arranged with light refreshments. Coffee, tea, small sandwiches. People gathered in groups, speaking softly, sharing memories. I moved through the room slowly. Listening. Watching. Collecting. A woman approached me, someone I vaguely recognized from Robert's business circle. He always spoke so highly of you, she said. Said you were the one who kept everything together. I smiled politely. Thank you. She hesitated, then added. He was very careful, you know? with his finances. Always thinking ahead. I met her eyes. Yes, I said. He was. She nodded, as if that confirmed something. Then she walked away. Across the room, Daniel and Melissa stood with a man in a gray suit. Professional. Measured. An advisor, most likely. I moved closer again, keeping my steps unhurried. Just need to confirm the full scope of assets, the man was saying. Once we have a complete picture, we can proceed with distribution planning. Distribution. Planning. Melissa nodded. We want to make sure everything is handled efficiently. Of course, the man replied. And your mother, he glanced toward me briefly. She's been informed of all accounts? A pause. Short. Tight. Melissa answered first. She's aware of the main ones, she said smoothly. We're just helping her with the details. The main ones. I almost smiled. Daniel didn't say anything. He just stood there, silent. I turned away before they noticed me listening. Walked to a table. Picked up a cup of coffee. Didn't drink it. Just held it. Warmth in my hands. Control in my posture. Silence in my expression. Later, as people began to leave, Daniel approached me. Mom, he said gently. We should talk soon. About next steps. Next steps. I looked at him. Really looked at him. At the man he had become. Not the boy I had raised. What kind of steps? I asked. He hesitated. Then, just organizing things. Making sure you're comfortable. Making things easier for you. Easier. Yes, Melissa added, appearing beside him. There are options we can explore. Downsizing maybe. Or alternative living arrangements. There it was. Clearer now. Not just control of money. Control of space. Of decisions. Of me. I nodded slowly. That sounds thoughtful, I said. Melissa smiled. Daniel relaxed slightly. They thought they were guiding the conversation. Leading it. But I wasn't lost. I wasn't confused. And I wasn't weak. That night, after the house was empty again, I stood in the hallway, looking at the framed photos. Years of memories. Birthdays. Holidays. Vacations. Moments that had once felt solid. Unquestionable. Now, they looked different. Not false. But incomplete. Because I could finally see what had been underneath. The distance. The subtle shifts. The quiet exclusions. I walked into Robert's study one more time. Closed the door behind me. And sat down at his desk. My desk now. The key was in my pocket. I placed it on the surface in front of me. Small. Simple. Powerful. They were searching. They were planning. They were preparing. And they believed they were one step ahead. I picked up the key, turned it slowly between my fingers, and allowed myself the smallest, quietest smile. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting to what they were doing. I was waiting for it. And that changed everything. 3 days after the funeral, Melissa invited me to dinner. Not asked. Invited. There's a difference. Just something small, she said over the phone. Family only. We should all sit down and talk. Talk. I agreed. Of course I did. Their house was 20 minutes away. A newer place. Clean lines. Open space. Everything modern, everything controlled. Very Melissa. I arrived exactly on time. 6 p.m. Daniel opened the door before I knocked. Mom, he said, stepping aside. Come in. His voice was warm. Practiced. I walked in slowly, taking in the details. The scent of something cooking, rosemary, maybe. The table already set. 3 plates. 3 glasses. Everything measured. Nothing accidental. Melissa stood in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. She turned when she heard me. You made it, she said with a smile. I nodded. I said I would. We sat down a few minutes later. The food was served quickly. Efficient. Like everything else. Chicken. Roasted vegetables. A bottle of wine already opened. Daniel poured. For Dad, he said, raising his glass slightly. For Robert, I replied. We drank. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was waiting. Melissa was the one who started. We've been going through some of the paperwork, she said, placing her fork down neatly beside her plate. Paperwork. Again, there are a few things. We need to clarify. I took a bite of food. Chewed slowly. Swallowed. Then I looked at her. What things? Her smile didn't change, but her eyes sharpened slightly. Well, she said, glancing briefly at Daniel before continuing. There are accounts, properties, investments. It's important that we understand the full picture. The full picture. I nodded. That sounds reasonable. Daniel leaned forward slightly. We just want to make sure everything is handled correctly, Mom. No mistakes. No confusion. No confusion. I almost smiled. Melissa reached for a folder beside her plate. There it was. Physical. Prepared. She opened it carefully and turned it toward me. These are the accounts we've identified so far, she said. I glanced down. Familiar numbers. Familiar structures. But not all of them. Not even close. I let my eyes move across the page without reacting. They seem in order, I said calmly. Melissa watched me. Closely. Too closely. As far as we know, she continued, this is everything. Everything. I looked up. Met her gaze. Is it? I asked. A pause. Short. Controlled. Daniel shifted slightly in his chair. Melissa smiled again. That's what we're trying to confirm. There it was. Not a statement. A probe. They weren't sure, and they wanted me to fill in the gaps. I picked up my glass of wine. Took a small sip. Set it down. I've never handled everything on my own, I said quietly. Your father managed a lot of it. Not a lie, but not the truth either. Daniel nodded slowly. That's what we thought. Of course you did. Melissa closed the folder. Softly. Deliberately. Then it's even more important that we take the lead here, she said. At least for now. Take the lead. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I reached for my napkin and adjusted it slightly on my lap. Small movement. Controlled. I appreciate the help, I said. And I meant it. In a way. Because the more they spoke, the more they revealed. Dinner continued. Light conversation. Safe topics. Weather. Neighbors. Nothing that mattered. But underneath it, something was building. I could feel it. The pressure. The intention. They hadn't asked the real question yet. But they would. It came with dessert. Melissa stood up and brought out a small plate of cake. Chocolate. Rich. Unnecessary. She placed it in front of me. I thought you might like something sweet, she said. I nodded. Thank you. She didn't sit down right away. Instead, she remained standing for a moment. Then, have you seen anything else, Mom? There it was. Direct. Clear. Finally, I looked up at her. What do you mean? Her expression stayed calm, but her voice tightened just slightly. Any other documents? Accounts? Information your husband may have left behind? Daniel didn't move. Didn't speak. He just watched me. Waiting. I picked up my fork. Cut a small piece of cake. Took a bite. Chewed slowly. Swallowed. Then I set the fork down. No, I said. Simple. Flat. Final. The silence that followed was different. Not waiting. Not polite. Tense. Melissa's eyes stayed on mine for a second longer than necessary. Then she nodded. All right, she said. But something in her tone had changed. Subtle. But there. Daniel exhaled quietly. Then we'll proceed with what we have, he said. Proceed. Forward. Without me. Or so they thought. After dinner, I stood by the door, putting on my coat. Melissa handed me my purse. Her fingers brushed mine briefly. Cold. Drive safe, she said. I always do, I replied. Daniel walked me outside. The air was cooler now. Sharp. He stood beside me as I reached my car. Mom, he said, his voice softer than before. You know we're just trying to help, right? I looked at him. Really looked at him. I know what you're trying to do, I said. He hesitated. Just for a second. Then he nodded. Good, he said. I got into the car, closed the door, and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. Inside, everything was quiet. Still. Focused. They had asked. I had answered. And now, they believed they had clarity. But what they didn't understand was this. Silence isn't always ignorance. Sometimes, it's strategy. I started the engine and pulled away slowly, watching their house in the rearview mirror. Lights on. Figures moving inside. Planning. Adjusting. Preparing. And for the first time, they had taken a step forward, without realizing. They had just walked exactly where I needed them to go. The next morning, I didn't rush. No urgency. No panic. Just routine. I woke up early again, before the sun fully came through the windows. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't press on you anymore. It settles beside you. I made coffee. Same mug. Same chair. Across from me, Robert's seat was still empty. But something had changed. I wasn't sitting there remembering anymore. I was thinking. Dinner the night before had told me everything I needed to know. Not what they said, but how they said it. The pauses. The way Melissa held eye contact just a second too long. The way Daniel let her speak first, and only filled in when necessary. They weren't guessing anymore. They were narrowing. Searching with direction. Which meant one thing. They were close to making a move. I took a slow sip of coffee and reached for my phone. No messages. Not yet. That was expected. People like Melissa didn't act impulsively. She planned, structured, timed things carefully, and whatever came next wouldn't happen by accident. By noon, the call came. "Mom," Daniel said, his tone calm, measured. "We scheduled a meeting tomorrow with the estate advisor." There it was. The next step. "I see," I replied. "It's just to finalize a few things," he continued. "Go over what we have. Make sure everything is properly documented." Properly documented. I leaned back slightly in my chair. "And you need me there?" I asked. A brief pause. "Yes," he said. "Of course. Of course." The meeting was set for 10 a.m. at an office downtown. Neutral ground. Controlled environment. Their environment. That afternoon, I went into Robert's study again. Closed the door. Sat down at the desk. The key was already in my hand. I didn't hesitate this time. I opened the drawer. Took out the folder. And for the first time, I read everything carefully. Not just the numbers. The structure. The names. The legal language. The connections. It wasn't just money sitting in accounts. It was layered. Trusts within trusts. Entities connected across different institutions. And then, a name I recognized. Not Daniel. Not Melissa. A law firm. The one Robert had used years ago, before Daniel ever stepped in. I sat still for a moment. Then I reached for my phone. The number was still saved. I hadn't called it in years. But it hadn't changed. It rang twice. "Law offices of Carter and Wells," a voice answered. I kept my tone steady. "This is Margaret Hayes," I said. "I believe my husband, Robert Hayes, was a client of yours." A pause. Typing in the background. "Yes, Mrs. Hayes," the voice replied. "I see his file here." "Of course you do. I'd like to schedule a meeting," I said. That evening, I didn't tell Daniel. Or Melissa. I didn't mention the call. I didn't mention the documents. I didn't mention anything. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Not formal. Not casual. Controlled. Neutral colors. Clean lines. Nothing that drew attention. But nothing that suggested weakness either. The office building was tall. Glass exterior. Reflective. I arrived 5 minutes early. Daniel and Melissa were already there. Of course they were. Melissa stood as I approached. "Good morning," she said with a polite smile. Daniel nodded. "Mom." I returned the greeting. Nothing more. The advisor joined us shortly after. Gray suit. Measured tone. Professional. He led us into a conference room. Large table. Clean surface. No clutter. Prepared. We sat. Melissa opened her folder immediately. Daniel leaned back slightly, watching. I placed my hands on the table. Empty. "Thank you all for coming," the advisor began. "Today we'll be reviewing the current estate structure and discussing next steps." Next steps. There it was again. Always forward. Always moving. He began outlining the known accounts. The same ones from the night before. Numbers. Assets. Properties. All correct. All incomplete. Melissa nodded as he spoke. Confident. Comfortable. Like someone already stepping into ownership. "And based on what we have," the advisor continued, "we can begin the process of consolidating and redistributing these assets." Redistributing. A careful word, but a powerful one. I finally spoke. "What exactly does that process involve?" The room shifted slightly. Not dramatically, but enough. The advisor turned toward me. "Well," he said, "it depends on the full scope of assets and the directives outlined in any existing estate plans." Directives? I nodded. "And if something hasn't been included?" I asked. Melissa's eyes moved to me instantly. Sharp. Focused. The advisor paused. "Then it would need to be disclosed and evaluated accordingly." Disclosed. There it was. Out in the open. The word they had been circling. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Calm. Measured. "And if it hasn't been disclosed yet?" I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. Daniel shifted. Melissa didn't. "Then," the advisor said carefully, "it's important that all relevant information is brought forward as soon as possible to ensure proper handling." Proper handling. Silence settled over the table. Not uncomfortable. Not uncertain. Focused. Melissa spoke next. Smooth. Controlled. "That's exactly what we want," she said. "Full transparency." Transparency. I almost smiled. I nodded slowly. "Of course," I said. And then, I said nothing else. The meeting continued. Details. Timelines. Procedures. But the energy had changed. Subtly. They were watching me now. Waiting. For something. Anything. But I didn't give it to them. Not yet. Because what they didn't understand was this. They were preparing to take control of something they didn't fully see. And I was about to show them just how much they had missed. But not today. Today, I let them finish. I let them believe they were still in control. Because the truth is, timing matters. And I wasn't ready to reveal everything. Not until they were too deep to step back. The meeting ended without resolution. No signatures. No final decisions. Just plans. And expectations. As we walked out of the building, Melissa was the first to speak. "That went well," she said, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "We're making progress." "Progress," Daniel nodded. "Once we finalize everything, it'll be a lot easier for Mom." Easier. I stood beside them, looking out at the parking lot. Cars moving. People walking. Life continuing as if nothing had changed. "I'm glad things are becoming clearer," I said. Melissa glanced at me, carefully, measuring. We said our goodbyes shortly after. Daniel offered to drive me home. I declined. "I need to stop somewhere first," I said. He didn't ask where. That was new. Before he would have. Now he assumed. And assumptions are dangerous. I drove in the opposite direction. Not home. Not yet. The address was already in my mind. Carter and Wells. The building was older. Brick exterior. Narrow windows. Not impressive, but solid. Reliable. The kind of place that didn't need to prove anything. Inside, the air felt different. Quiet. Not the polished silence of corporate offices, but something deeper. More deliberate. A receptionist greeted me. "Mrs. Hayes?" I nodded. "They're expecting you." Of course they were. I was led into a smaller office. Not a conference room. Not a display. A working space. Files. Shelves. Real work. A man stood as I entered. Older than I expected. Gray hair. Steady posture. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Jonathan Carter." I shook his hand. Firm. Measured. "Thank you for seeing me," I said. "Your husband was a very precise man," he replied. "He made sure we would." We sat. No small talk. No unnecessary steps. Just truth. "I assume you found the documents," he said. Not a question. A statement. I nodded. "I have." He leaned back slightly. "And you understand what they represent?" I paused, then answered honestly. "I understand the numbers," I said. "I'm not sure I understand the intention." That seemed to satisfy him. Jonathan Carter reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder. Different from mine. Thicker. More complete. He placed it on the desk between us. "Your husband structured his assets in layers," he said. "Not to hide them, but to protect them." Protect. I listened. "He anticipated pressure," Carter continued. "From multiple directions. Business. Legal. And personal." Personal. I didn't react. But I understood. "He left clear instructions," Carter said, tapping the folder lightly. "But they are conditional." Conditional. The words settled in the room. "What kind of conditions?" I asked. Carter met my eyes. "The kind that require observation," he said. "Not immediate action." I felt something shift inside me. Not surprise. Recognition. "Your husband didn't want everything revealed at once," Carter continued. "He wanted to see how people behaved without knowing what was at stake." I leaned back slowly. "So this is a test." Carter didn't answer immediately. Then, "It's a safeguard," he said. I looked down at the folder. At the edges of something far bigger than I had first realized. "Am I the one being tested?" I asked. A small pause. Then, "No," Carter said. "You're the one holding the outcome." Silence. Not heavy. Not tense. Clear. He opened the folder. Inside were documents I hadn't seen before. Legal structures. Trust agreements. Clauses. And then, a page with Robert's signature. Familiar. Steady. Final. "There are provisions here," Carter said, "that activate based on your decisions." My decisions. I felt my fingers rest lightly on the edge of the desk. Still steady. Still controlled. "If you choose to disclose everything immediately," he continued, "the assets follow a standard distribution model." Standard. Predictable. "And if I don't?" I asked. Carter looked at me carefully. "Then you retain full control," he said, "until you decide otherwise." There it was. Clear. Simple. Powerful. I exhaled slowly. Not relief. Not fear. Just understanding. "They've already started moving," I said quietly. Carter nodded. I assumed they would. I looked at him. "Do they know about you?" "No," he said. "And your husband intended to keep it that way, unless you chose otherwise." I almost smiled. "Robert, even now, you're still thinking 3 steps ahead. I closed the folder gently. I haven't told them anything, I said. Carter nodded again. That was wise. Wise. Not emotional. Not reactive. Strategic. They believe they're organizing the estate, I added. And in a way, Carter said, they are. I stood up slowly. The chair moved back with a soft sound. They're not ready for the full picture, I said. Carter didn't disagree. As I reached for the folder, he stopped me. Leave that here, he said. For now. I paused, then nodded. Of course. Some things weren't meant to be carried openly. Not yet. At the door, I turned back. One question, I said. Carter waited. Why didn't he tell me everything? The room went still. For a moment, longer than the others. Then Carter answered. Because he trusted you to figure out what mattered, when it mattered. I held his gaze, then nodded once. That was enough. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter, but sharper, clearer. I walked to my car and sat inside without starting the engine. My hands rested on the steering wheel. Steady. They thought this was about money. About accounts. About control. But it wasn't. Not really. It was about something much simpler. Much deeper. Who people become when they think no one is watching. And now, I was watching. Every word. Every move. Every decision. And when the time came, I would decide what they deserved. That night, I didn't go straight home. I drove slowly. No music. No destination in a hurry. Just the sound of the engine and my own thoughts finally settling into place. Robert hadn't left chaos behind. He had left structure, layers, control, and most importantly, choice. When I got home, the house felt different again. Not empty, not hollow, occupied by awareness. I walked into the kitchen, set my keys down, and stood there for a moment. Still, listening, not for sounds, for patterns. Daniel called at exactly 7:18 p.m. Not earlier, not later. Precise. Mom, he said, how are you feeling after today? I leaned lightly against the counter. I'm fine, I replied. A pause. Then, the advisor thinks we should start consolidating accounts soon, he said. It'll make everything easier moving forward. Consolidating. That word again. I let it sit for a second. And how would that work? I asked. Well, he said, we'd move everything into a more centralized structure. Easier to manage. Easier to oversee. Oversee. I almost smiled. Would I still have access? I asked. Another pause. Short. Too short. Of course, he said quickly. It's just about efficiency. Efficiency. I see, I said. And I did. After the call ended, I didn't move right away. I just stood there, letting the conversation replay. Not what he said, but what he avoided. They weren't just organizing. They were positioning, setting up control points, access, authority. And they were moving faster now, less cautious, more confident, because they believed something had been confirmed. At dinner, at the meeting, in my silence, they believed I didn't know. I walked into the living room and sat down slowly. The same chair, the same view. But now, I was no longer reacting to them. I was tracking them. The next morning, I didn't wait. I made one call. Not to Carter. Not yet. To the bank. Good morning, Mrs. Hayes, the woman on the line said. How can I assist you today? I kept my voice calm. I'd like to review access permissions on all accounts associated with my name, I said. There was a brief pause. Of course, she replied. Give me just a moment. Typing. Soft clicks. Quiet processing. Mrs. Hayes, she said after a moment. I'm seeing that several accounts currently have joint access authorized under Daniel Hayes. Of course they do. I'd like to change that, I said. No hesitation. No explanation. Another pause. May I ask the reason for the update? She said gently. I looked out the window. The garden was still blooming. Unaware. I'd simply prefer to manage things independently for now, I replied. That was enough. By noon, the changes were in progress. Not all at once. Carefully. Gradually. No alerts. No sudden shifts. Just quiet adjustments. Control returning. Piece by piece. That afternoon, Melissa sent a message. Short. Direct. We should meet again soon. There are a few documents we need you to sign. Need. Not suggest. Not discuss. Need. I stared at the message for a moment. Then replied. Of course. Let me know when. Polite. Open. Unthreatening. Exactly what they expected. But something had changed. Not in what I said. In what I was doing. They were preparing to take control. And I had just begun to take it back. That evening, I went into Robert's study again, closed the door, sat down. The drawer stayed locked. The folder stayed hidden. But now, I didn't need to look at it. I already understood. This wasn't about revealing the truth. Not yet. It was about timing, position, leverage. And they were giving me all three. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes for a moment. Not to rest. To think. Daniel. Melissa. Every word they had said. Every move they had made. Patterns. Clear now. Predictable. Melissa led. Daniel followed. But Daniel still needed something. Approval. Validation. Permission to act. Which meant, if the pressure increased, he would hesitate. And hesitation creates opportunity. I opened my eyes. Looked at the desk. At the space where Robert used to sit. You knew, I said quietly. Not a question. Because he had. He had seen this coming. Prepared for it. Built something, not just to protect assets, but to reveal truth. And now, it was unfolding. Exactly as he intended. I stood up slowly. Walked to the door. Paused for a moment before opening it. Out there, they believed they were getting closer. Closer to control. Closer to answers. But in reality, they were stepping deeper into something they didn't understand. And the more they moved forward, the less control they actually had. I turned off the light and stepped out of the room. Because now, I wasn't just watching anymore. I was guiding where this would go next. Melissa didn't wait long. 2 days later, she called. Not a message this time. A call. Mom, she said, her voice smooth as ever. We've scheduled another meeting. There are a few documents that need to be finalized. Finalized. Such a clean word. As if everything had already been decided, and I was simply there to confirm it. When? I asked. Tomorrow afternoon, she replied. 3 o'clock. Same office. Of course it was. Controlled environment. Again, I agreed. Without hesitation. All right, I said. A brief pause on the other end. Relief. She expected resistance. She didn't get it. The next day, I arrived exactly on time. Not early. Not late. 3 o'clock. Daniel was already seated when I walked in. Melissa stood near the window, speaking quietly with the advisor. They both turned when I entered. Mom, Daniel said, standing up quickly. Melissa smiled. Polished. Confident. You made it, she said. I nodded. I said I would. This time, the room felt different. Not tense. Not uncertain. Certain. They believed this was the moment things would move forward. Officially, the advisor gestured for us to sit. Folders were already placed on the table. Prepared. Aligned. Each one labeled. Melissa didn't wait. She opened the folder in front of me and turned it slightly so I could see. These are standard authorization documents, she said. Just to help us manage everything more efficiently. Efficient. Always that word. I looked down. Carefully. Page 1. Transfer of access. Page 2. Consolidation authorization. Page 3. Something else. More permanent. I didn't react. Didn't frown. Didn't question. I simply read. Slowly. Letting the silence stretch. Daniel shifted in his seat. Not uncomfortable. Just aware. Waiting. These will allow us to take care of the financial side, he added. So you don't have to worry about the details. The details. I almost smiled. I placed my hands flat on the table. Still. Calm. Then I looked up. And if I don't sign? I asked. The room changed. Subtly. But completely. Melissa answered first. You can take more time, of course, she said. But it would delay things. Complicate the process. Delay. Complicate. Words designed to sound like inconvenience. Not risk. The advisor cleared his throat slightly. These are common procedures, he said. Especially in cases where family members are assisting with estate management. Assisting. I nodded slowly. As I understand it, I said. These documents would give you access to all financial decisions moving forward. Melissa held my gaze. Yes, she said. Temporarily. Temporarily. I looked back down at the pages. Then closed the folder gently. I'll need time to review these, I said. Daniel leaned forward. Mom, we've already gone through everything. It's straightforward. Straightforward. I'm sure it is, I replied. My voice didn't change. Didn't rise. Didn't soften. Melissa's smile faded slightly. Not gone. Just thinner. We're just trying to make this easier for you, she said. I looked at her. Really looked. At what point, I asked quietly, did I say this was difficult? Silence. Daniel blinked. Melissa didn't answer immediately. The advisor shifted slightly in his chair. Professional. Neutral. But watching. I didn't mean, Melissa started. I know what you meant, I said. Still calm. Still controlled. I reached for my purse. Opened it. Took out a pair of reading glasses. Put them on slowly. Then I opened the folder again. Turned to the second page. Explain this section to me, I said, tapping lightly on the paragraph. Melissa leaned in. Too quickly. Prepared. It's just a standard clause, she said. It allows us to act on your behalf if necessary. Act on my behalf. And what defines necessary? I asked. Another pause. Daniel spoke this time. It just means if something urgent comes up. Something you might not want to deal with. Might not want to deal with. I nodded. Then turned the page. And this? I asked. The advisor leaned forward now. That clause allows for asset restructuring under advisory supervision, he explained. Restructuring. Meaning? I asked. He hesitated. Just slightly. Meaning, assets could be reallocated for efficiency, he said. Reallocated. I closed the folder again. This time, I left my hand resting on top of it. I see, I said. And I did. Clearly. Completely. They weren't just asking for help. They were asking for control. Full. Quiet. Legal. Melissa leaned back slightly. Her posture changed. Less relaxed. More alert. Mom, she said carefully, we're on the same side here. I met her eyes. For a long moment. No, I said. The word didn't come out harsh. It didn't need to. We're not. I continued. Daniel's face tightened. Confusion. Then something else. Concern. Melissa didn't move. Didn't blink. This is just a misunderstanding, she said. I shook my head slightly. No, I said again. It isn't. Silence filled the room. Heavy now. Not polite. Not controlled. Real. I slid the folder back toward her. Slowly. I'm not signing anything today, I said. Daniel opened his mouth. Closed it. Melissa finally leaned back in her chair. Fully now. Her smile gone. Then we'll need to revisit this, she said. Her tone had changed. No softness. No warmth. Just structure. Of course, I replied. I stood up. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. Just done. Let me know when you're ready to discuss this properly, Melissa added. I paused at the door. Turned slightly. I already am, I said. Then I left. Outside, the air felt cooler than before. Sharper. They had made their move. Clear. Direct. And now so had I. Because this was no longer quiet observation. This was positioning. And for the first time they knew. I wasn't where they thought I was. I didn't go home right away after that meeting. I drove. Slowly. No destination at first, just distance. For the first time since Robert passed, something had shifted out of silence. Not completely, but enough. They knew now. Not everything, but enough to understand one thing clearly. I wasn't passive. I wasn't confused. And I wasn't going to sign anything just because they asked. That changes people. When someone thinks you're weak, they move carefully. When they realize you're not, they move faster. More direct. Less patient. I turned into a small parking lot a few blocks away and stopped the car. Turned off the engine. Sat there. Hands still on the wheel. Then I reached for my phone. One call. Carter and Wells. The voice answered. It's Margaret Hayes, I said. A pause. Then, of course, Mrs. Hayes. I need to move forward, I said. No hesitation. No explanation. I understand. Jonathan Carter's voice came on the line a moment later. What would you like to initiate? I looked straight ahead. At nothing. And everything. Control, I said. Silence. Brief. Then, understood, he replied. We didn't talk long. We didn't need to. Because everything had already been built. Structured. Prepared. All it needed was activation. By the time I got home, it had already begun. The house was quiet again. But now, it felt like a place of decision. Not memory. I walked straight into Robert's study. Closed the door. Locked it. Then I sat down. The key was already in my hand. But this time, I didn't reach for the drawer. I didn't need to. Instead, I opened my laptop. Logged in. Entered information I hadn't touched in years. Layer by layer. Account by account. Access points. Authorization levels. Ownership structures. Everything Carter had confirmed was real. And now, it was shifting. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Quietly. Names removed. Permissions changed. Notifications redirected. Daniel's access reduced. Then limited. Then gone. I didn't rush. I didn't hesitate. Each step, deliberate. Because this wasn't reaction. This was correction. By the time I finished, the structure looked different. Cleaner. Tighter. Mine. I closed the laptop slowly, sat back, and exhaled. Not relief. Clarity. My phone buzzed. Right on time. Daniel. I let it ring once. Twice. Then answered. Mom, he said, his voice tighter than usual. Did something change with the accounts? There it was. Immediate. I leaned. Back in the chair. Yes, I said. A pause. Longer this time. I'm having trouble accessing a few things, he said. Some of the permissions, I adjusted them, I replied. Silence. Why, he asked. Simple question, but not a simple answer. Because they're mine, I said. The words landed. Clean. Final. Another pause. Mom, we were managing those together, he said. No, I replied. We weren't. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't argue. Didn't explain. I didn't need to. Because for the first time, there was no confusion about position. He exhaled sharply. I could hear the shift. Melissa is going to want to review this, he said. Of course she is. She can review whatever she likes, I said. But she doesn't have access anymore. Silence. Heavy now? This isn't how this was supposed to go, he said. There it was. The truth. Supposed to. I almost smiled. No, I said quietly. It isn't. He didn't respond right away. And in that silence, I could hear it. Not anger. Not yet. Uncertainty. Because the plan had just broken. Mom, he started. Then stopped. He didn't know what to say. That told me everything. I'll talk to you later, I said. And I ended the call. No argument. No explanation. No emotion. Just action. I set the phone down on the desk. Looked around the room. Robert's room. Still. Quiet. But no longer passive. You knew this would happen, I said softly. Not to the room. Not really. To him. Because he had. He had built all of this, not just to protect assets, but to reveal people. And now, they were revealing themselves faster. More clearly. Because control had shifted. And they felt it. That night, I slept. For the first time since he passed. Not deeply. Not peacefully. But enough. Because something inside me had settled. Not grief. That was still there. But something else. Position. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for what they would do next. I already knew. Because people don't change their nature under pressure. They reveal it. And now, they had no reason to hide anymore. Which meant, whatever came next, would be honest. And I was ready for that. The next move came faster than I expected. Not days. Hours. At 8:42 the next morning, my phone rang. Melissa. I looked at the screen for a moment before answering. Not. Hesitation. Timing. Margaret, she said the second I picked up. Not Mom. Not this time. Her voice was calm, but not soft. I understand you made some changes to the accounts, she continued. No greeting. No pause. Straight to it. Yes, I said. Silence. Short. Controlled. That's a significant disruption, she said. We were in the middle of organizing everything. Disruption. I almost smiled. I'm aware, I replied. Another pause. Longer this time. I think it would be best if we met, she said. Today. Not a question. I'm available, I said. Of course I was. 2 hours later, they were at my house. Not their office. Not neutral ground. Mine. I opened the door before they knocked. Daniel stood slightly behind her. Not beside. Not leading. Melissa stepped forward. Composed. Precise. Thank you for seeing us, she said. I stepped aside. Come in. They walked into the living room. Their eyes moved quickly. Noticing. Measuring. The same house. But something felt different now. Because it was. I gestured toward the chairs. Sit. They did. Melissa first. Daniel after. I remained standing for a moment. Then sat across from them. No coffee. No small talk. Melissa placed her bag beside her chair. Carefully. We need to address what happened, she said. We are, I replied. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Just enough. You removed access without discussion, she said. That affects our ability to manage the estate. Manage. Still that word. I removed access because it wasn't yours, I said. Daniel shifted. Uncomfortable now. Mom, we talked about this, he said. We're trying to help. I looked at him. Steady. You're trying to take control, I said. Silence. Not denial. Not immediately. Melissa leaned forward slightly. Hands folded. That's not accurate, she said. We're trying to protect you. Protect. I let that word sit between us. From what? I asked. She didn't answer right away. From making decisions without full information, she said finally. I nodded slowly. That's interesting, I said. Daniel looked at me. confused. Because that's exactly what you were doing, I continued. Melissa's expression tightened. We had the information available to us, she said. Not all of it, I replied. There it was. A shift. Small, but real. Daniel leaned forward now. What do you mean, he asked. I looked at him, then at her. Carefully. You've been working with partial visibility, I said. Melissa's eyes sharpened. If there's something else, she said, you need to disclose it. Need. Again. I leaned back in my chair. No, I said. The word landed heavier this time. Daniel blinked. What, he said. I don't need to disclose anything, I continued. Not to you. Silence. Real silence now. Melissa didn't move. Didn't blink. That's not how this works, she said. It is now, I replied. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Frustration starting to show. Mom, you're making this harder than it needs to be, he said. Harder. I almost laughed. No, I said quietly. I'm making it clear. Melissa stood up. Slowly. This isn't sustainable, she said. I looked up at her. It doesn't need to be, I replied. Another pause. Then she said it. If you continue like this, we may have to take additional steps. There it was. Not a suggestion. Not concern. A threat. Daniel didn't stop her. Didn't correct her. He just sat there. And that told me everything. I stood up as well. What kind of steps? I asked. Her expression didn't change. Legal ones, she said. Clear. Direct. I nodded once. I expected that, I said. Daniel looked up at me. Surprised. You did, he asked. Yes, I said. Because this was always where it was going. Pressure. Escalation. Control through force when control through trust failed. Melissa picked up her bag. We're trying to avoid that, she said. No, I replied. You're preparing for it. Silence again. She didn't deny it. Instead, she moved toward the door. Daniel followed. Slower. At the doorway, he turned back. Mom, this isn't what Dad would have wanted, he said. That stopped me. Not emotionally. Precisely. I looked at him. You're right, I said. He blinked. Relief, just for a second. Then I finished. This isn't what he wanted, I said. This is what he prepared for. The words landed. Hard. Daniel didn't respond. Melissa didn't turn around. They left. The door closed behind them. And just like that, the line had been crossed. No more pretending. No more soft language. No more help. Now it was clear. They weren't guiding. They were opposing. And they had just made it official. I stood there for a moment, hand still on the door. Then I turned, walked slowly back into the living room. Everything looked the same, but nothing was. Because now, this wasn't a quiet observation anymore. This was a conflict. Defined. And for the first time, they had shown me exactly how far they were willing to go. Which meant, I knew exactly how far I needed to go next. They didn't wait to follow through. 3 days later, I received the letter. It was delivered in the morning. Certified mail. Clean envelope. Formal print. My name written in full. Margaret Elaine Hayes. I held it in my hands for a moment before opening it. Not hesitation. Recognition. This was the next step. Inside, the language was exactly what I expected. Structured. Polite. Precise. A formal notice. Requesting cooperation. Outlining concerns about asset management. Suggesting that additional oversight might be necessary for my protection. For my protection. I read it once. Then again. There was no anger. No surprise. Just confirmation. They had moved from conversation to documentation. From suggestion to pressure. And they had done it exactly the way people like them always do. Clean. Legal. Careful. I folded the letter neatly and placed it on the table. Then I reached for my phone. One call. Carter and Wells. The voice answered. It's time, I said. No explanation needed. I understand, Jonathan Carter replied. We scheduled a meeting for that afternoon. When I arrived, the same quiet greeted me. The same steady air. But this time, there was something else waiting. Preparation. Carter didn't waste time. He placed a file in front of me. Different from the others. Thicker. Final. They've initiated formal pressure, he said. Yes, I replied. He nodded. Then it's appropriate to respond, he said. Appropriate. Not reactive. Not emotional. Strategic. He opened the file. Inside were documents I hadn't seen before. Not just structures. Not just accounts. Directives. They've made their position clear, he continued. Now you have the option to make yours. I looked at the pages. Carefully. This wasn't about defense anymore. This was about declaration. If I proceed, I said, what happens? Carter met my eyes. Everything becomes visible, he said. On your terms. Visible. I exhaled slowly. And them? I asked. They'll understand, he said. Not comfort. Not reassurance. Reality. I nodded. That was enough. We went through everything. Line by line. What would be revealed? What would remain protected? What would change? And what wouldn't? Because some things, once decided, don't move again. By the time we finished, the structure was clear. Not complicated. Final. I signed nothing. Not yet. But the direction was set. That evening, I returned home. The house felt the same. But I didn't walk into the living room. Didn't sit down. I went straight to Robert's study. Closed the door. And this time, I opened the drawer. The folder was still there. Exactly where I had left it. I placed it on the desk. Opened it. $35 million. Numbers that had started this entire shift. But now, they meant something different. Not weight. Not burden. Choice. I ran my fingers lightly across the page. You knew, I said quietly. Not questioning. Not doubting. Acknowledging. Because he had built this moment. Piece by piece. Not to control the outcome. But to reveal it. And now, it was clear. I closed the folder. Locked the drawer. Then I took out my phone. One message. To Daniel. We need to meet. Tomorrow. With your advisor. No explanation. No detail. Just direction. He responded within minutes. Okay. Nothing more. Good. Because now, there was nothing left to soften. The next day would not be a discussion. It would be a reveal. Not emotional. Not dramatic. Precise. Because the truth doesn't need volume. It only needs timing. And theirs had just run out. The next day arrived without delay. 10 a.m. same office. Same room. But nothing about this meeting was the same. When I walked in, Daniel was already there. Sitting. Still. Not on his phone. Not distracted. Just waiting. Melissa stood by the window again. Same position as before. But her posture had changed. Less fluid. More rigid. They both turned when I entered. Mom, Daniel said. His voice was quieter this time. Careful. Margaret, Melissa said. No softness. No performance. I nodded once. Took my seat. The advisor sat at the head of the table. Prepared. Neutral. But today, he wasn't leading. I was. Before we begin, I said calmly, placing my hands on the table. There are a few things we need to clarify. No one interrupted. Melissa didn't move. Daniel didn't speak. Good. I reached into my bag and placed a single folder on the table. Not thick. Not dramatic. Just enough. What you've been working with, I continued, is incomplete. Melissa's eyes moved to the folder. Sharp. Focused. We've been working with all available information, she said. No, I replied. You've been working with what you could find. Silence. Daniel leaned forward slightly. What does that mean? He asked. I opened the folder. Turned it toward them. Inside, clean documents. Structured. Clear. Numbers. Names. Signatures. Melissa leaned in. Fast this time. No hesitation. Daniel followed. And then it happened. The moment. The shift. $35 million. Not hinted. Not suggested. Shown. Clearly. Undeniably. The room went still. Not tense. Not loud. Empty. Because when truth enters a room like that, it takes all the air with it. That's not. Daniel started. Then stopped. Melissa didn't speak. She read. Again. And again. Looking for something. A mistake. A gap. There wasn't one. This structure, the advisor said slowly, was not included in our previous review. No, I said. It wasn't. Silence again. Then Melissa looked up. Why? She asked. Simple question. Clear answer. Because it wasn't yours to review, I said. No emotion. No anger. Just truth. Daniel sat back. Hard. You knew about this? He asked. I met his eyes. Yes. The word didn't echo. It settled. Since when? He asked. Since the day your father died, I said. Another silence. Different now. Not confusion. Realization. Everything they had said. Everything they had planned. Built on the assumption that I didn't know. And now, that assumption was gone. Melissa straightened slowly. This changes things, she said. I nodded. Yes, I said. It does. She looked at the documents again. Then back at me. We need to reassess everything, she said. Need. Again. I shook my head slightly. No, I said. The word landed differently this time. Not resistance. Authority. I've already made my decision, I continued. Daniel looked up. What decision? He asked. I closed the folder gently. The assets will not be consolidated, I said. Melissa's jaw tightened. They will remain under my control, I added. Clear. Final. Daniel exhaled slowly. And us? He asked. There it was. Not money. Position. I looked at him for a long moment. Then answered. You'll receive what your father intended, I said. No more. No less. Melissa didn't like that. It showed. And what exactly is that? She asked. I held her gaze. Enough, I said. Silence. Heavy now? Because they understood. Not the numbers. The boundary. I stood up. The chair moved back softly. This isn't a negotiation, I said. No one stopped me. No one argued. Because there was nothing left to argue. The structure was clear. The control was clear. And for the first time, so was I. I picked up my bag. Paused for a moment. Then I looked at Daniel. Not as a child. Not as someone I needed to protect. But as someone who had made his choices. I loved your father, I said quietly. And I protected what we built together. A pause. I'm still doing that. I turned. Walked to the door. No rush. No hesitation. Just done. Outside, the air felt lighter. Not because anything had been lost, but because everything had been revealed. That evening, I returned home. The house was quiet again. But this time, it felt complete. I walked into Robert's study one last time. Sat down in his chair. Looked around. Nothing had changed. And everything had. You were right, I said softly. Not about the money. About the people. I turned off the light. Closed the door. And for the first time, I didn't look back. Because the truth is, they thought I had nothing. But what I had was something they never understood. Not money. Not control. But clarity. And once you have that, you don't need anything else. Not even their approval. Especially not their permission. If you were me, how would you handle that situation? Let me know your opinion. And remember to subscribe to the channel for more great videos.